Okay, hello everyone again. Graham Campbell here. Thank you for joining us. I'm from People-Centered Excellence. I'm with Katie Anderson again, and my colleague Mike Dennison. Hi guys. For those of you who are on our earlier webinar, you'll remember that Katie spoke quite recently about learning to lead, people-centered leadership practices to develop a culture of learning. That was the title of the webinar. It was a really popular webinar. And when we broadcast it live, we had lots of interaction and questions, which I'll come on to shortly. And subsequently, there's been lots of positive discussion and feedback. So thank you for that. So we did promise that we'd use some additional time to answer your questions. And this is what this recording is all about. That's why we've added this bonus session in. So without further ado, I'm going to jump straight in and ask some of the questions that we didn't get time to answer on the first broadcast. So are you ready, guys?
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Raring to go. Okay, so the first question was, to the point of direction, support and learning, how do you envisage the application of daily hindsight, intentional reflection, impact a team and grow the business?
That's a great question, and the concept of, so the Japanese word hansei means self-reflection, and this, to me, this is the fundamental part of the plan, do, study, adjust cycle, the Deming cycle. We often do plan, do, plan, do, plan, do in our organizations without really studying, reflecting, and adjusting. And to me, this concept of hansei and reflection is a key part of the sort of what Mr. Yoshino had said was that the secret to learning is its attitude towards learning. And they incorporate that reflection into their daily processes. One of the things that I do as a coach when I'm working with individuals or teams is to really help them bring in this practice of reflection to their day or their routine in the day. And it can be as simple as in the morning, setting your intention for the day, what's the plan, and then 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the day, reflecting on how did the day go for the plan, what are you going to adjust for tomorrow? And that simple but seemingly challenging way to find the time to do that has really accelerated learning for individuals and teams, both about sort of how their own behavior, but also the problems that they're trying to solve together. And for example, I've been doing this with a team that I've been coaching, so working with the individuals as well as the group. And what we have established to help them get into that practice is just a simple one-page sheet for them to fill out and to help support their practice of reflection. But now also we have short check-in sessions, and they verbally put forward, 15-minute session, one key reflection of what they're learning, and that structure helps put in the habit of reflection. Mike, what do you think from your experience of Toyota?
I think it's exactly what you said. The key for me is that the term hansei, we tend to wrap it up with self-reflection, but actually it's because it comes from within the Japanese culture. It's a lot more than that. So it's a deep reflection. It's almost a sense of regret that I didn't achieve it, which puts a real big meaning of, well, what can I really do differently to make it better? And I love what you said about the idea of building it into the coaching. And so I'm exactly the same. I would use a couple of questions to really get that person reflecting deeply about something. So I think hansei is not something that we're used to in the West. Our sense of hansei is very quickly, did it work or didn't it work? And
yes.
If it didn't work, okay, well, let's move on. There's none of this deep sense of regret about something. So it is a cultural thing, but I think we can teach it. Definitely think we can teach it.
Absolutely. I want to build on a comment or an idea based on what you just said too, is, when we do our reflection, it's usually like a quick project debrief, and it's like, what were the outcomes and maybe some of the actions? And hansei gets even deeper. What was the thinking and what were the assumptions that went into it? And so going deeper, and how do we get better about calling out that thinking process and the assumptions that underlie the actions that we take, which result in the outcomes that we see? And so it is much deeper, as Mike said, than just, plus delta, okay, let's move on.
Yeah. I think it's interesting as well. Is that maybe it's a cultural thing about people see if they do any reflection, they do reflection at the end of something, so they almost see it as a kind of terminal point and go,
Yes.
"Oh, phew, we've done the reflection. Let's move on." But actually, the reflection is a starting point for the next round of improvement.
Absolutely. I think in the webinar I shared a quote of mine that reflection's not the end; it's the beginning of the learning.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a misnomer by having the PDCA cycle, as we call it, start with P. It really should start with check, adjust, CA, PD. So we're starting with the reflection opposed to ending with it.
Okay. Fantastic. Cool. Thank you for that one. Okay, let's move on to another question. Why do you think few leaders exhibit the leadership qualities you spoke about?
Yeah. Well, we're habituated to be we're rewarded for being the expert who has all the answers. I mean, this is how we're rewarded up in, our schooling, and many of us in our early jobs, in our careers, we are independent contributors who are developing expertise. But when we shift into a leadership role, our expertise is not just in no longer the content that we've been trained in, but it's about how are we managing teams, and it's a really different skill. And so we don't really focus and help people develop that. And that's something that Toyota has done more effectively, is that they're helping people learn to learn, but also learn to lead. And I think that's, and then leading to help people learn and sort of continuing that cycle. So we're kind of, I know from my own experiences, like when I was given finally a management role, I was given no support, very little support and training from a little bit from my leader, but just kind of really thrown into it, and a little bit of sink or swim, and you do your best, but that's not the way to develop leaders and to develop learning culture. So yeah.
I think
experiences, Mike?
Yeah, I think that is one of the big issues, I think, generally, and I think some of it comes around that certainly in the West, a lot of the teachings, and one of the other questions was around why don't business schools teach this type of stuff. And I think one of the key things that I've observed, certainly in the work I've done and reflecting back on Toyota, the whole emphasis is on learning, just as you said, Katie, and the emphasis is on not just passing on knowledge. It's actually deep learning at a level so that people really do understand what it is that they're trying to do, and that the leader themselves, their role is to develop that learning in their people. Now that's why I think your book has a great title, the idea of leading to learn and then learning to lead, or learning to lead, leading to learn. The concept behind that is very much about developing leaders who understand what learning's all about, and then transferring that over so that you develop the capability of the people. I think one of the big myths actually is a lot of people think of Toyota as being the elimination of waste, but I think it's far more than that. To me, when I came out of Toyota, I never realized it, but their emphasis was much more on growing capability, than ever it was about elimination of waste.
Yeah, right. That's more the production side, but it's as Yoshino-san says, we make people while we make cars. That's the first. The result is that by developing people's capability, then we're able to do all these other things. Mike, I want to build on something you said, because I'm actually writing an article right now that's titled Wisdom, and I can't believe I'm writing articles, editing the book, and doing all this at the same time. But one of the great ahas I had when talking to Mr. Yoshino, and actually Michelle Baldine, who lives in the San Francisco Bay Area too, is the one who asked Mr. Yoshino this question. But in the Toyota Way, 2001, the document translates the pillars as respect for people, which is actually respect for humanity. And then the pillar that's continuous improvement, which is, we usually think of the word Kaizen as just representing continuous improvement. It actually says wisdom and continuous improvement. So Chie with Kaizen. And I think in there, just saying continuous improvement, we've lost that wisdom part. So the concept of wisdom to me is exactly what you said, Mike, here. It's not just passing on the knowledge, but it's passing on the ability to take that knowledge into action. It's the leading to learn. That's really the fundamental process. I'm so curious to why Toyota chose to not use the word wisdom in translating that pillar?
I obviously don't know because
no, I know. I think it's just interesting. No, I wasn't asking you, but I think it's. I mean, we've missed a nuance, a fundamental deep nuance about this concept of wisdom and what that means as it relates to learning, by just calling that pillar continuous improvement.
I think if I know of anything, and one of the things that I do understand is the way that they try to simplify things. And so the idea of having wisdom and continuous improvement almost like would have seemed too much, and they would have said, do you know what, we understand wisdom within our organization, and that's why we're doing it that way. So I think it's probably just to simplify, because if you look at the Toyota way, there's lots of background information that more or less puts context behind a lot of those 5 main elements that are in there.
Yes. Right, and I agree. It's probably due to a desire to simplify, but also not realizing that in that simplification, they lost some of the richness of the meaning. And the document was created as an internal document to sort of codify the culture. Anyway, I just think it's really interesting, this word wisdom and how that relates to learning, and knowledge, and the process of learning to lead and leading to learn.
All right, let's move on, shall we? So the next question, and we talked about this one a little bit before we started broadcasting, but I think it's worth asking anyway, because it's probably a slightly left field answer to this. Regarding Toyota's commitment to learning, typically how much time per year would they expect employees to spend learning?
Yeah,
Mike, do you want to take that one through?
I'll give you a perspective. So when I was at Toyota, I was very fortunate to be selected to participate and deliver what was known as the member development program, and so I was recruited. I went to the other sites, obviously had to spend time in Japan, and one of the big elements of that was what is it that we need to teach people. And then this was in the early days. This was about 3 years into our new plant. So there was a commitment that said that every member needed to have a minimum of 5 days offline training and business acumen awareness of Toyota. So they learnt about the Toyota production system in detail, even though they got some in their early days of recruitment. They also learnt about manufacturing technologies, about why Toyota did things a certain way and why they put machinery in and where they had no machinery. And they also learnt about the technical elements of manufacturing, about the type of product. And we even had a system where we would strip down a whole car, the front of a car, so that they understood where the engine actually went and who the customer and how those bolts went on and everything else. So that was always a big part of it. So there was a 5-day commitment. I believe now that's not quite as much as that, but fundamentally, Toyota's whole learning framework is about on the job. And a leader, the role of a leader is to have the knowledge to teach, the knowledge to instruct, the knowledge to lead, and the knowledge of the job. And he has to have that, and that's a big part of it. And I don't think other companies really recognize that. So for me, learning is on the job, and I would go so far as to say that perhaps everybody is learning every day, and the leader's job is to ask enough questions so that everybody is learning every day, and that's how powerful it is.
Yes.
Yeah. For sure. I'd love to add too, Mr. Yoshino was talking about how his orientation program, he was going into a back office role. He was not an engineer. He wasn't going to shop floor. His orientation was nearly 4 months long, with over half of that time spent on the shop floor in the Gemba, because they wanted these new college graduates to know the process both of making cars and then what it meant to make people as well. And that's where some of the stories of the paint I put out there. But I wholeheartedly agree with Mike that it's not, when we say how much time is spent for learning or training, we have to differentiate what do we mean by learning. And we often see in the West that learning happens offline rather than at the work. And there are times, as Mike said, that there is offline learning at Toyota, and Mr. Yoshino talks about this too, that there are times where you need to teach certain concepts or have a deep dive or an intensive, but the expectation is that this is learning is part of happening every day. And that's really the secret of Toyota, is that they do
and it's happening at every levels as well, because I mean, from my experience, it's built into the manpower plan. So you carry some extra capacity in the manpower plan to allow you to do observations, to do Kaizen, to do learning, while the factory is continuing to make cars. It's not downtime. It's actually happening in there now. You don't get access to that that additional resource all the time. You know, the factory still has to run, but it's built in. It's built in. Everybody has time to do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thanks for that one. So we have another question here. Katie, I'd love to know why and how you think Toyota developed this way of working, how they developed this culture so differently from others. Is it strongly linked to the Japanese culture generally, or are there other factors within Toyota that made them different?
So it's a great question. And as a lean practitioner who moved to Japan over 5 years ago, I definitely had some assumptions and preconceptions when I went there. And what I really discovered through living in Japan for 18 months is that, and visiting, and since then I've visited many other companies, the Japanese culture and Toyota culture are not synonymous. There are some elements for sure within Japanese culture that have been incorporated into Toyota's culture. You know, the concepts of respect and how in Kaizen and striving for perfection. I think there's a lot of that in the Japanese culture, but there's some other aspects that were really brought from the West. You know, the Toyota founders visited and sons came and visited the United States even before World War II. The supermarket concept came from the US. They incorporated sort of maybe some of the best practices from the East and the West and created something even better and different. And sort of built upon these concepts. And some things that I have observed that maybe that Toyota's brought into its culture could be considered countermeasures to maybe some more limiting concepts within Toyota, in Japanese culture, which is very hierarchical, where people look to the boss to have all the answers and wait to be told in a more typical Japanese company these days. But Toyota's taken that hierarchy and turned it on its head. So they still have a very strong hierarchy, but the role of the manager is different. Instead of telling everyone what to do, they've created this problem-solving capability at all levels. So I don't know, sort of, it evolved over time, but it wasn't just, it's not just Japanese culture. They've done something different and innovated and improved. Mike, what's your experience from Toyota?
Just before we went on air, you were talking, Katie, about the Toyota precepts, and I think that's a very, very powerful element. You know, you could probably repeat those. I don't have them in front of me, but
actually, I had a slide. If I can share while you talk about it.
So the idea that, you know, going back 150 odd years ago when Toyota was first evolved before it ever became a car manufacturer, Sakichi Toyoda developed a set of precepts which are really important constructs of how he wanted the people in the company to think. But as it's evolved, when you start to break it down, they've taken a huge amount from the West. You know, all of their senior engineers all visited lots of Western companies and plants to try and understand how the West were doing what they were doing. And, you know, even their concept of standardized work and the job instruction was developed from the World War II training within industry structure. You know, so very, very, I see Toyota as an amalgam and then pulling in everything that they needed to become better as an organization. So, you know, I mean, look at those precepts just for argument's sake. You know, always be faithful.
We can see those now, Katie. I'm not sure whether you can, but we can see them. So
yeah, I can see them too. It's blocking part of my screen.
I just think they're amazing because they put a human side to the company for me.
Yes.
There's a human element in all of those.
Right, and like build a home-like atmosphere that is warm and friendly. Be grateful. Stay ahead. Be creative. Stay ahead of the time. Yeah. And it's about the company and the overall good. What I find is really incredible, you know, if you go to Toyota in Japan, how closely they've worked with their suppliers that are in the same region. And even Toyota, the Kyushu Lexus plant, they have gone out and created capability within manufacturing companies on the island of Kyushu because it didn't exist there. And they actually put their people in as coaches and developers of the people. And even if they're not 100% Toyota suppliers, it's where they feel like it's for the overall good of the society to learn this way and practice and have that development. So it's
it's incredibly grounded, isn't it? And again, without name dropping, I saw John Shook present something about the fact that the area that Toyota started is a farming prefecture, isn't it? It's quite a rural area.
It's
So a lot
very
of these
rural.
things are very much grounded in those principles of looking after the land, you know. And
Yep. And in the book, I include some of that background and context that I literally learned from Mr. Yoshino. Of course, going there in person, but they call the Mikawa region, and how it's both geographic location and its historical connections to the first Tokugawa, who established the shogunate. How all of that influenced Toyota's culture, and how it's very different even than some places that are like Nagoya, which is the big city very nearby, or Tokyo, and how those cultures developed because of its more, as he calls them, country boy, country guy spirit.
Yeah, just picking up on the family-like atmosphere, I always remember being explained to me around the logic of the team member, team leader, group leader, and manager. And what they always said is think of the team leader as being like your big brother. He's not a leader as such. He's the person that you go to support you so that you can manage your situation. And think of your manager a little bit like your father. So he's the person that you would look up to as a person who sets an example about how they want you to behave. That whole ethos is really embedded in the culture of that company, and you can't take that away. You know, that's the way they've grown up, and it's built on that premise.
That's great. That's a really good question as well. But I'm going to flip it actually, because there's another one here that talks about we can't adapt Japan or Kaizen Toyota culture. This gentleman was from the Middle East on our broadcast, and he says, what do you think we have to do instead of trying to copy the past, what others have accomplished elsewhere?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And also one of the reasons I wrote this book is we're talking about looking at the past and learning from like 40 years of Toyota history. But that's great, but how can we then use that to help us learn and create in our own context, in our own environments? And I know Mr. Yoshino agrees with me wholeheartedly on this, that it's not about copying the tools or copying making it look, the visible things that you can see. It's about those principles and those concepts around people development. What does it mean to reflect, to learn, to create a culture of no blame? How does that look in your environment? What are the things that you need to do? What are the barriers that you have, and what are the countermeasures you need to put in place? So Toyota put in place, created its culture, and because it needed to overcome some cultural, barriers itself of the Japanese culture. And so it created this system. And how can those principles help you focus less on the tools and more on the principles? And it shouldn't and won't look the same. And in fact, the things, if you go to Toyota, I was there just in May again last year. If you go again, it's going to look a little bit different. It's always evolving.
Yeah,
definitely.
Actually, Mike?
Yeah, no, something just came to mind there. It was very much, a lot of people take what Toyota does and they take it almost literally, and they think that they have to copy it exactly to get the results. And it's not actually, the tools are just there to solve a business problem that you have in the time. But it's the frame of reference about developing the capability of the people to decide which tool to use.
Yes.
And I always think of the term I always come back to, and this is since Toyota and been working in consultancy, is I think it's adopt and adapt. So you adopt the principles and you adapt the tool to fit the need to solve your business problem. So therefore you structure what it is that you're doing, because some of the tools are not necessarily important for you where you are now on your journey. Yet some others are really important because you need to use them as a way of engaging with your people and your staff and helping them to see what they can do to make improvements.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, and that's always a balance, isn't it? Because it's probably far more important to get people to do the people-centered development part of it first, rather than a lean program or developing the tools.
Yeah.
Because there's a danger of, we've got to have that tool, it's in the toolkit, we need a bit of that. And it's like, that might not actually be the thing that you need right now for your organization's growth and success. And it probably would be better to develop your own. Sometimes you do need to plug something in quite quickly because you're hemorrhaging, so you've got a big problem that you need to fix quite quickly. But actually, the true kind of organisations that look after their people, some of those ideas will emerge, from engaging with their people in the right way anyway.
Yeah.
Build your people before you build the product. And I would even say grow your people to grow your business.
I've got time for one more.
Okay.
How do Toyota leaders inspire the workforce to develop their human social conscience to make closer links with the community?
Oh, well, I would go back to those precepts there. They're really community focused. And I don't know if you saw, did we talk about Akio Toyoda's recent speech? I can't remember if we did or not, but I recommend people going and reading it. This is the current president of Toyota, and in his end of financial year speech, he also talked about the COVID crisis and also looking into the future. And he says the new mission of Toyota is about happiness and people's happiness, and we want to mass produce happiness. And I don't think going back to mass production, but I think the intention is we want happiness on a global scale. That is our purpose. And so there are many different ways to do that. It was really interesting too that he used those words, because there's a company that I visit in Toyota who Mr. Toyoda, Akio Toyoda, considers the retired chairman of this food manufacturing company to be his sensei. And that company considers its purpose people's happiness. So I thought it was very interesting that now Akio Toyoda is saying Toyota's mission is to mass produce happiness. So I recommend going to see that speech, because it really gets to the core of the human aspect of Toyota and why they make cars. And it's not just cars. They're looking to innovate to make people's lives better, to make the environment better. That was what led the development of the Prius. That is why Mr. Yoshino actually was put in charge of working on a fuel cell project, not for cars, but for home use back in the early 2000s. And so Toyota's looking, again, way into the future. How are we going to improve our communities and our world? So
yes.
That's
And your view, Mike?
Yeah, no, there was something I remember being told, and there was the 5 precepts, but there was also the 4 elements of focus, and one of them was customers must receive value.
Oh yeah.
Second one was
clear, ambiguous, end-to-end communication.
No, it wasn't that. It was customers must. It was the 4 main stakeholders. The customer must receive value. The staff must get satisfaction. The community must benefit from our product, and the business must make profit in order to reinvest in the company. And there was those 4 stakeholders elements, and I was trying to remember it. But what that tells me a lot of is that word respect is such a big word, and yet people don't really grab it. And I think probably an even better word that doesn't get talked about much is Toyota cares. It's very obvious that they care about their people. The leaders care about their people. And so that caring approach creates a need to want to contribute in some way, shape or form. And I don't think it's surprising that people want to give back to society and do things and contribute into their communities, because I think it's grown within the frame of what they do every day. Absolutely,
yeah. I think we've got some personal experience of that as well, but I think that it's an interesting challenge, isn't it, that in the world of artificial intelligence and automation, one of the challenges is to make work interesting, and to use work as a forum for people to grow as people. That's quite a statement of intent, isn't it? Rather than the sort of rush to commoditize things and get people out the door.
But don't you think that, again, most people look at solving problems as a way of eliminating the problem. Most people look at continuous improvement as a way of cutting costs and saving cash. Whereas Toyota uses both of those as a way of engaging the staff to feel better about what they're doing, because they're contributing.
It's a different frame. It's a different frame of how to approach it. Yeah. And again, respect for people. There are 2 words in Japanese, and there's the actual better translation is respect for humanity.
Yeah,
and that encompasses more, because we often think, respect there's a respect because like you're a more senior person or you're more accomplished or you want something. So I respect you because of your title or your role. But respect for humanity gets back to that concept of I respect you for so much more in our world, and that's what Toyota leads with.
Yeah, what you see on the surface is only when you look under the iceberg. There's a huge amount. You know, even I'm still learning about that company. You know, after all these years.
Yeah, sure. Guys, that was great. I think we've probably answered most of the questions now that were left unanswered on the first broadcast. Katie, just before we wrap up, anything else? Just remind us, you've got a book coming out shortly. How do people get to that? How do they find you?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to just share my screen again. I was recording. Here? I'm just going to pull this up just so that people can see. Oh, it's not letting me do the whole. Okay, so you can see a little bit, but it has information about how you can get a hold of me, and also the book's coming out for pre-order. It's not paperback outside the U.S. is not available right now, but the ebook is available for pre-order, and mid-July the paper book should be available in all regions that Amazon distributes to. So that will be coming out, and really excited for people to order that. You can go to Amazon or just go to learningtolead.com, and you'll have all of the information that you need there. Or you can just go to my website, kvjanderson.com. Those are my initials, KVJA Anderson. So, yeah. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I've already bought it. I can't get to it yet.
You know what?
I've already bought it, but I can't get to it yet.
I know. Well, hey, I was telling you, I'm in the final edits of the book right now. So it's an interesting parallel process of, it's actually been really helpful to be talking about the book, clarify, and then going back into the stories. Anyway, but as we said, it's time for the book to end and for you to read it, and for us just to keep talking about the principles that are contained within, and that's the most important.
I think it's fantastic to be able to share some of this thinking with people that are like-minded and bringing different levels of insight and experience to it. It really makes it powerful to be part of the lean and continuous improvement community to be doing this kind of thing. So thanks so much once again, Katie, for your time.
Thank you, Graham.
It's been a blast as always.
Look forward to more conversations.
Any final comments?
I don't have any final comments except just thanking Katie. Just having the conversations as we've had, sometimes opening it up with a question forces you to probe parts of your brain that you might have lost or left behind. And so it's good to remind ourselves what we experienced. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was how this book even started. Was just me asking Mr. Yoshino a lot of questions, and he's saying, "Wow, I haven't thought about these things in so long," or your questions are allowing me to think about it in a different angle, and so that was the genesis of the book.
So good.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you guys so much, and everyone, please go out and order the book. And I look forward to your comments and hearing from you. I really do love connecting with people around the world. So
yeah, that's
perfect.
Great.
Thanks, guys.